In this video, we'll talk, I think, about the distance formula and the midpoint formula. They're two relatively brief topics, and there's not a lot of interest to really say about them. They're just equations that you have to know. So suppose we have 2 points on the plane. Call them x1, y1 and x2, y2. And you want to find the distance between these points. We have a formula for doing so, the distance formula. It says that the distance is the square root of the difference of the x-coordinate squared plus the difference of the y-coordinate squared. All that's under a square root. And before we do an example, let's just quickly see where this comes from. Why is this distance? And the answer is the Pythagorean theorem. Let's create a right triangle like so. The length of this leg is y2 minus y1. This is the point x2, y1. The length of this leg is x2 minus x1. The Pythagorean theorem says that the hypotenuse squared is the sum of the squares of the legs. And we take the square root of both sides to get this. Some students never memorize the distance formula. They just draw this triangle every time and use the Pythagorean theorem. Let me make a comment about the distance formula. Well, several comments. First of all, the distance is unitless unless we're looking at a word problem that gives us units. So if we find that a distance is the square root of 5, it's not the square root of 5 feet or the square root of 5 inches, it's just the square root of 5. Another comment that we'll make as we do an example is that it doesn't matter which point you select to be x1, y1, and which point you select to be x2, y2, you'll get the same distance. So we could let this be x1, this be y1, this be x2, this be y2, or we could say this is x1, this is y1, this is x2, this is y2. It doesn't matter. Let's call this x1, y1. This x2, y2. Let me just give myself a little more space here. And then this is very thug and chug, or thug and play. I've heard those both. We just take these x's and y's and plug them in here. I guess the only point that needs to be made is that you need to be careful of those negative signs. So -7 minus -3. That's -7 plus 3. So let's see. -4 squared. And, well, what do you know? -4 squared again. The square gets rid of the negative sign, so 16 plus 16, the square root of 32. And my philosophy of square roots is to either not bother simplifying them or to get a decimal approximation of them. I don't sit here going, can I rewrite this as a perfect square times something and then pull the perfect square out? That's always seemed a bit pointless to me, to be honest. Second formula is the midpoint formula. And if you think this video's gone on a bit long, don't worry, because the midpoint formula is quite brief and doesn't require a lot of comment. We have 2 points on the plane, and we are looking for the point midway between them. Hence the name. And the midpoint is x1 plus x2 divided by 2. There's your x coordinate. y1 plus y2 divided by 2. There's your y coordinate. Why? Where does this come from? Well, suppose you have a number line and you have 2 values on the number line and you want to know the midpoint of those values. What would you do? Well, the midpoint would be their average. So that's all we're doing. We're taking the average of the x-coordinates and the average of the y-coordinates. And I guess all that remains is to do a brief example. Let's find the midpoint between 1 and -3 and -2, 6. And again, as with the distance formula, this is very plug and play. It's, I would say, easier than the distance formula. You don't have any awkward square roots and squaring to worry about. You do have to watch your negative signs. Remember that if you add a negative number, that is subtraction. But other than that, hopefully pretty straightforward. We took the average of our x's here, and we took the average of our y's here. And let's see if I can simplify this. 1 plus -2 is 1 minus 2. That's -1/2. -3 plus 6 is 3. So that's 3/2. Now, admittedly, the distance formula and the midpoint formula are a little tacked on to this section. I mean, they're related to graphs in the sense that if you have 2 points, there are points on the Cartesian plane. So that's why we cover this material here.